I'm Donna, 32 female. I live in a city that never sleeps, in an apartment that's more functional than flashy, and I spend my days staring at numbers that represent the hopes and futures of my clients. For years, I believed that success was the best way to earn my family's respect, but I was about to learn that for some people, your success is not a source of pride, but a threat to their own security. This is the story of how my own father tried to declare me financially incompetent in a court of law, not knowing he was arguing against a woman who managed a $100 million fund. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My mother, Helen, was the quiet anchor of our family, while my father, Richard, was a man of loud opinions and rigid principles forged during his 40 years as a bank manager. My mother was the one who saw the nuances in the world and in her children. She was the one who noticed my fascination with the stock market ticker that scrolled across the bottom of the news channel when I was just a teenager. My father saw it as frivolous gambling. My mother saw it as a language I was learning to speak. She bought me my first book on investing, a well-worn paperback she found at a second-hand shop. Every woman, she told me, placing it in my hands, needs to be the master of her own fortune, big or small. That single sentence became the foundation of my entire career. My brother, Mark, was 3 years older and lived in a different universe. He was the son my father orbited. Mark was all charisma and grand ideas. He didn't speak the language of numbers. He spoke the language of pitches, of potential, of the next big thing. My father, a man who spent his life approving or denying loans based on cold, hard data, was inexplicably mesmerized by his son's speculative ventures. Mark was going to be a millionaire, a titan, an innovator. My quiet, steady climb up the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm seemed dull and unimpressive in comparison. I wasn't a founder. I was just an employee. I didn't have a vision to change the world. I just managed other people's money. The dynamic was set early and hardened over the years. Mark's failed ventures, a boutique coffee delivery service that burned through cash, a mobile app for raiding park benches that went nowhere, were framed by my father as learning experiences. My promotions, on the other hand, were met with a cursory, "That's nice, dear, just be careful with it." It was as if he couldn't comprehend my success, so he chose to diminish it. It was safer, more understandable, to see me as the little girl who needed help with her math homework, not as a woman making complex financial decisions every single day. When my mother passed away after a long illness, the quiet anchor was gone, and our family ship was immediately lost in a storm. Her absence left a void that was quickly filled by my father's anxiety and my brother's opportunism. We gathered for the reading of her a few weeks after the funeral. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with unspoken expectations. My father sat stiffly in his chair, a man expecting a simple, straightforward process. Mark was beside him, looking somber but with a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. He had recently launched his latest grand venture, a tech startup promising to revolutionize the pet grooming industry, and I knew he was counting on a significant inheritance to keep it afloat. My mother's will was mostly as expected. The house went to my father, of course. Sentimental items were divided between Mark and me, but then came the final, most significant part of her estate, her personal savings and investment portfolio. It was a sum she had built quietly and diligently over decades, separate from my father's finances. It amounted to nearly $200,000. My father leaned forward slightly. This was the money Mark needed. The lawyer, a kind man who had known my mother for years, cleared his throat and read the final clause. "To my beloved children," he read, his voice steady, "I leave my entire investment portfolio to be divided as follows. To my son, Mark, I leave the sum of $20,000 with all my love and hope for his future." I saw Mark's face fall. 20,000 was a pittance compared to what he was expecting. My father's brow furrowed in confusion. The lawyer continued, "The remainder of my estate, all savings, stocks, bonds, and assets, I leave in its entirety to my daughter, Donna." He paused, then read the final, crucial sentence. I do this not out of a lack of love for my son, but out of a deep and abiding faith in my daughter's wisdom, prudence, and her proven ability to manage financial matters responsibly. It is my final wish that she uses this gift to secure her own future, a future she has worked so hard to build. Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating. I was stunned. I looked at the lawyer, who gave me a small, sympathetic smile. I then looked at my father. His face, just moments before calm and composed, was now a mask of disbelief that was quickly curdling into rage. Mark just stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, his dreams of a cash infusion turning to dust. My father was the first to speak, his voice a low growl. That can't be right, there must be a mistake. The will is perfectly clear, Richard, the lawyer said calmly. Helen signed it and had it witnessed 6 months ago. 6 months ago? My father repeated, his voice rising. She was sick. She wasn't in her right mind. Donna must have manipulated her, filled her head with nonsense. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Dad, I didn't even know she was changing her will. I never spoke to her about this. He wasn't listening. He turned his glare on me, his eyes filled with an accusation so profound it felt like a physical blow. You with your fancy job, always talking about things no one can understand. You probably confused her, made her think you were the only one who could be trusted. She trusted me because I earned it, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I built a career on being trustworthy with money. Mom saw that. Your mother saw a daughter, he snapped. I see a girl who still doesn't know the value of a dollar because she plays with Monopoly money on a computer screen. Mark is building a real business with real employees. He needs that capital. A business that has yet to turn a profit, I countered, the words tasting like acid. It was the first time I had ever openly challenged my brother's pursuits in front of my father. Mark finally looked up, his expression a mixture of humiliation and resentment. It's fine, Dad, I don't want her money anyway. The words were hollow, a child's pathetic attempt to save face. The meeting ended disastrously. My father stormed out of the office, Mark trailing behind him like a chastened puppy. I was left sitting there, the weight of my mother's final gift feeling less like a blessing and more like a curse. She had wanted to empower me, to give me a final acknowledgement of the woman I had become. But in doing so, she had inadvertently ignited a war. She had seen my strength and rewarded it, but she had underestimated my father's blindness and my brother's desperation. As I walked out of that office and into the cold afternoon air, I felt a deep sense of foreboding. My mother's will wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a battle I never wanted to fight. The weeks following the will reading were a masterclass in passive aggression and emotional manipulation. My father refused to speak to me directly. If I called, he would let it go to voicemail. If I visited the house, he would find a reason to be in the garage or busy with paperwork. My brother, Mark, was his mouthpiece. The calls from Mark started a few days after we left the lawyer's office. The first one was conciliatory, a transparent attempt to charm me into submission. Hey, Donna, he began, his voice oozing a forced casualness. Listen, about that day, things got a little heated. Dad's just, you know how he is. He's grieving. He's worried about Mom's legacy. Mom's legacy was very clear in her will, I replied, my tone flat. I was at my desk, looking over preliminary reports for a new tech fund I was building. The contrast between the competent, respected professional I was at work and the disobedient child my family saw me as was jarring. Yeah, about that, Mark said, getting to the point. Look, I know you got the lion's share and that's fine. You deserve something, of course. But you have to admit it's not exactly fair. I'm in the middle of a crucial fundraising round for Pet Connect. You know, the grooming app? We're about to secure a huge partnership. I just need some bridge funding to get us over the line. $150,000 would do it. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just asking for the money, he was acting as if it were his by right. Mark, Mom left you $20,000, she left me the rest. It's not a pool of family money for us to negotiate over. Come on, Donna, don't be like that, he whined. You don't need it. You've got your big salary. For me, this is everything. This is my shot. Dad thinks you should just give me the capital. He says it's what Mom would have wanted for us to share. What Mom would have wanted is written on a legal document, I shot back, my patience wearing thin. She wanted me to have it. She trusted me, not you, to manage it. Maybe if one of your shots had ever actually hit the target, she would have felt differently. The line went quiet for a moment. I had hit a nerve. You've always been jealous, he finally spat, the fake charm gone, replaced by his true ven. Honest self. Just because you settled for a boring desk job, you can't stand to see me take a risk and build something real. My boring desk job requires more discipline and financial acumen than you've shown in your entire life, I said, ending the call. That was just the beginning. The next phase of the campaign involved my father weaponizing the rest of our extended family. Aunts and uncles I hadn't heard from in months started calling, all singing the same tune. Your poor brother is trying so hard, one aunt told me, and your father is so worried about him. Money can tear a family apart, Donna. Sometimes you have to make a sacrifice for the good of everyone. Every conversation was framed as if I were the selfish one, the dragon hoarding a treasure that rightfully belonged to the family's great male hope. They spoke of Mark's vision and his passion, words that had no place on a balance sheet. They spoke of my father's stress, his high blood pressure, his sleepless nights, all implicitly my fault. No one, not once, mentioned my success. No one acknowledged that my mother's decision might have been based on a rational assessment of her 2 children. In their eyes, I was a stubborn daughter defying her grieving father and sabotaging her ambitious brother. The pressure reached its peak during a disastrous family dinner my father insisted on holding a month after the will reading. He claimed it was to clear the air, but it was an ambush. From the moment I walked in, I was the defendant in a kangaroo court. Donna, we need to talk about this inheritance situation, my father began, foregoing any pretense of a friendly meal. He sat at the head of the table, a grim-faced judge. Mark sat to his right, looking like a wronged prince. There's nothing to talk about, I said calmly, placing my napkin on my lap. Mom's wishes were clear. Her wishes were clouded by her illness? He boomed, his fist hitting the table. She wasn't thinking straight. She was always soft on you, let you get away with anything. But this is a serious family matter. Mark's future is at stake. My future is also at stake, I countered, and Mom wanted to help me secure it. Your future is a paycheck from some faceless corporation, he sneered. Mark is building an empire, he's creating jobs, that's a real legacy, something with the family name on it. He needs that money as an investment. Dad, you call it an investment. I call it throwing good money after bad, I said, my voice dangerously low. I've seen Mark's business plans, they're full of holes. His projections are pure fantasy. Mark slammed his fork down. Here we go again, Miss Wall Street thinking she knows everything. You can't understand a disruptive tech model. It's beyond your comprehension. I comprehend profit and loss, Mark. I comprehend burn rates and investor liability. Do you? I looked him straight in the eye. He flinched. My father intervened, his face turning a blotchy red. That's enough, Donna. You are being disrespectful. You have always been irresponsible with money, always chasing risky schemes. I almost laughed. Risky schemes? Dad, my entire job is about mitigating risk. What are you even talking about? I'm talking about that stock market club you were in college, he bellowed, grasping at straws. You told me you lost $200, $200 of your mother's money. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He was referencing a university investment club from over a decade ago where we each put in a small amount to learn. The $200 was a club fee, and yes, our collective portfolio had a bad year. It was a learning experience, one that had ultimately led me to my career. He was using a 12-year-old, insignificant event as proof of my financial incompetence. That was college, Dad. It was a club. I'm not a student anymore. It shows a pattern of behavior, he insisted, his voice cracking with self-righteous fury. You're impulsive. You don't think things through. Your mother enabled you, but I won't. That money should be managed by someone responsible. It should be given to Mark under my supervision. That was it, the end game. He didn't just want me to give Mark the money, he wanted control. He wanted to reassert his patriarchal authority and put me back in my place as the clueless daughter. My mother had freed me, and he was trying to put the chains right back on. No, I said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. Absolutely not. The money is mine. Mom gave it to me, and what I do with it is my decision. I stood up, my appetite gone. I'm sorry, but I can't stay for this. It's clear you don't see me as an adult, let alone a competent one. As I walked to the door, my father's voice followed me, laced with a threat that chilled me to the bone. You're making a huge mistake, Donna. There are ways to protect family assets from an irresponsible child. You're forcing my hand. I did know what he meant at the time, but the words echoed in my mind for days. I had won the argument, but the look on his face told me he had no intention of losing the war. He was a man who had spent his life in a position of authority, and he was not about to let his own daughter defy him. He believed he was acting out of love and concern for his son, but his actions were forged in a much darker fire. A toxic cocktail of pride, favoritism, and greed. He was about to make a move so drastic, so insulting, that it would sever our relationship forever. Life settled into a tense, cold silence for about a month. The harassing phone calls from extended family stopped, and both my father and brother ceased all communication. A part of me, the naive, hopeful part, thought they had finally accepted my decision and were giving me space. I tried to focus on my work, channeling my frustration into my portfolio analyses. I was in the process of vetting companies for a new ESG fund, a fund focused on environmental, social, and governance criteria. It was a project I was passionate about, one that felt meaningful. It was a world away from the petty greed that had consumed my family. The illusion of peace shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a high-level meeting with my firm's partners, presenting my projections for the new fund. I was in my element, confident and in control, answering complex questions with data-backed certainty. My assistant poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Donna, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's a man here to see you. He says it's urgent and personal. Annoyed by the interruption, I excused myself. In the reception area, a nondescript man in a rumpled suit was waiting. He asked me to confirm my name, and when I did, he handed me a thick manila envelope. You've been served, he said flatly, turned and walked out. I stood there for a moment, the envelope feeling strangely heavy in my hand. My heart began to pound in my chest. I walked back to my office, my colleagues, curious glances following me, and shut the door. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. The document was dense with legal jargon, but the words at the top of the first page were stark and unambiguous. Petition to establish a conservatorship. I read it again, and then a third time, the words blurring through a haze of disbelief. A conservatorship. A legal proceeding to declare a person incapacitated or otherwise unable to manage their own financial affairs and personal life, and to appoint a conservator to do it for them. The petitioner was listed as Richard Miller, my father. The petition claimed that I, Donna Miller, was susceptible to undue influence and financially irresponsible, and therefore incapable of managing the inheritance left to me by my deceased mother, Helen Miller. It requested that the court appoint a conservator to manage my newly acquired assets. The proposed conservator, my father, Richard Miller. I sank into my chair, the document slipping from my hand and scattering across my desk. My father was suing me. He was taking me to court to have me declared legally incompetent. He was trying to strip me of my autonomy, all to get his hands on my mother's money and funnel it to my brother. The threat he had made at dinner, there are ways to protect family assets from an irresponsible child, hadn't been an empty tantrum. It had been a declaration of war. The petition was filled with the most outrageous and insulting fabrications. It painted a picture of me as a flighty, impulsive spendthrift with no grasp of real-world finances. It cited my unstable career in the volatile and speculative stock market as evidence of my poor judgment. It twisted my independent life in the city into a sign of isolation and lack of a proper support system. And there it was, in black and white, the ridiculous accusation he had thrown at me during dinner. The $200 loss from my university investment club over a decade ago was presented as a key piece of evidence of my long-standing pattern of reckless financial behavior. But the most painful part was the sworn affidavit attached to the petition. It was a statement, signed and notarized, from my brother Mark. In it, he corroborated every one of my father's lies. He described me as being easily confused by complex financial documents and claimed that I had frequently expressed anxiety and uncertainty about managing my own money. He even invented a story about me nearly falling for a phone scam, a complete fabrication he described in vivid, believable detail. He stated that he and his father were only taking this action out of deep love and concern for my well-being. The betrayal was a physical sensation, a sharp, cold blade twisting in my gut. My father's actions were born of pride and control, but Mark's were pure, calculated greed. He was willing to stand up in a court of law and perjure himself to paint his own sister as Menta. Ellie unfit, all for a chance to bankroll his failing startup. For a few minutes, I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the legal papers that represented the complete and utter destruction of my family. The people who were supposed to love and support me were actively trying to ruin my reputation and seize control of my life. My mother had left me her legacy as a vote of confidence, and my father and brother were trying to turn it into a legal cage. Then the shock began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning fire. It started in my stomach and spread through my veins, a white-hot anger that burned away the hurt and the disbelief. They thought I was irresponsible. They thought I was incompetent. They thought I was a confused little girl who needed her daddy to manage her affairs. Fine. They had filed a petition in a world of laws, evidence, and facts. And in that world, I was not a confused little girl. I was a professional. I picked up my phone, my hand now perfectly steady. I didn't call my father or brother to scream at them. They were beyond reason. I called the top-rated estate lawyer I could find. Jessica Morales speaking. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Ms. Morales," I said, my voice cold and clear. "My name is Donna Miller. I've just been served with a petition for a conservatorship filed by my father. I need to hire you to fight it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. A conservatorship filed by a parent against their adult, working child is highly unusual, Ms. Miller. The petitioner would need to provide overwhelming evidence of incompetence. A humorless smile touched my lips. "I don't think they understand what the word evidence actually means," I replied. "They seem to think family anecdotes and outright lies will be enough. They have made a very, very big mistake." "Well then," Jessica Morales said, a hint of steel in her voice, "it will be my pleasure to help you teach them that lesson. Can you be in my office tomorrow morning at 9? As I hung up the phone, I looked at the scattered legal documents on my desk. The anger was still there, a roaring furnace inside me, but now it had a purpose. It was no longer just the pain of betrayal, it was fuel. My father and brother had started this fight based on a caricature of me that they had invented to suit their own narrative. They were about to come face to face with the woman I actually was, and she was not someone you wanted as an enemy. My first meeting with Jessica Morales was like a splash of cold, invigorating water. She was sharp, no nonsense, and radiated a confidence that immediately put me at ease. Her office, with its clean lines and panoramic city views, felt like a fortress. I laid out the entire story: my mother's will, my father's controlling nature, my brother's endless stream of failed businesses, and the absurd petition now sitting on her desk. Jessica listened intently, her expression unreadable. She read through the petition and Mark's affidavit, her eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. When she finished, she looked up at me, a small, wry smile on her face. "Well, Donna," she said, leaning back in her chair. This is one of the most creatively written pieces of fiction I've ever seen filed with the court. They're banking on a judge seeing a traditional family squabble and defaulting to the patriarch's wishes. They're assuming your professional life is too complicated to be relevant. So what do we do? I asked, the anxiety creeping back in. How do we fight this? We don't just fight it, Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. We dismantle it, we annihilate it. They have attacked your competency. Our response will be to prove that you are not just competent, but an expert in the very field they claim you're ignorant of. But first, we go on the offensive. This entire lawsuit is predicated on the idea that your brother, Mark, is the responsible, business-savvy alternative for this capital. So, let's find out just how savvy he really is. This was the part of the battle I understood. Investigation, due diligence. It was what I did for a living. Jessica's strategy was to flip the script. My father and brother had put my life under a microscope, so we would put Mark's under an electron microscope. Mark's latest company is called PetConnect, I told her. He claims it's a revolutionary platform, but he's always vague on the details. He's been trying to raise a new round of funding. Perfect, Jessica said, already typing on her computer. Startups, especially those seeking funding, leave a paper trail. We'll hire a forensic accountant. I want to see everything. Bank statements, incorporation documents, debt records, correspondence with investors. If it exists, I want it. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's team went to work, and I did my own digging. My world was finance. I had access to databases and networks that the average person didn't, while the forensic accountant focused on Mark's official business records. I started looking into the whispers and rumors in the local tech and investment communities. It didn't take long for a disturbing picture to emerge. The first major crack appeared when the forensic accountant got access to the financial records for PetConnect. The company was a disaster. It was hemorrhaging money with practically zero revenue. Mark had hired a team of developers on promises of equity that was essentially worthless and was months behind on paying them. The huge partnership he told me was on the horizon was a non-binding letter of intent from a mid-level manager at a regional pet store chain, contingent on him raising $2 million in capital first. It was a bluff, a house of cards he was trying to keep from collapsing. But the real bombshell was in his personal finances. Mark was living a lie. The fancy downtown apartment? He was 6 months behind on rent and facing eviction. The luxury car he drove? It was a lease, and he had missed the last 3 payments. Credit card statements revealed a lifestyle built on debt, with thousands spent on lavish dinners, designer clothes, and expensive gadgets, all while his company was failing and his employees were going unpaid. He was a classic example of a founder who had fallen in love with the image of success, not the hard work of achieving it. While the accountant was digging up the numbers, I found the human element. I tracked down a former co-founder of his, a talented programmer who had left PetConnect 6 months prior. He agreed to speak with me on the condition of anonymity. We met in a quiet coffee shop. He looked exhausted. Mark is a great salesman, the man told me, stirring his coffee. He can sell anyone on a dream. The problem is he's the first person he sells. He genuinely believes his own hype, even when all the evidence points to failure. When I tried to show him our burn rate, to tell him we needed to pivot or cut costs, he accused me of being negative and not believing in the vision. He doesn't want partners, he wants an audience. He went on to explain that Mark had used the initial seed money not on product development, but on a flashy new office and expensive launch parties. He blew through $200,000 in 4 months with almost nothing to show for it, the programmer said with a sigh. That's why I left. The ship was sinking, and the captain was busy polishing the brass. This was the man my father deemed a better steward of my mother's legacy than me. A man who was actively defrauding his employees and investors through his own delusion and incompetence. The final piece of the puzzle came from a public records search Jessica initiated. It turned up a previously undisclosed civil suit against Mark from his last failed venture, the coffee delivery service. He had personally guaranteed a loan for equipment and then defaulted, leaving his business partner at the time on the hook for the entire amount. He had settled out of court, and the record was sealed, but the initial filing was public. It painted a clear pattern of reckless financial behavior and a willingness to leave others to clean up his mess. Jessica and I compiled everything into a file that grew thicker by the day. It was a damning portrait of a man drowning in debt, propped up by my father's blind faith and desperately seeking a cash infusion to continue his charade. My mother's inheritance wasn't just bridge funding for him, it was a life raft, and he was willing to drown his own sister to get to it. As we prepared for the initial court hearing, Jessica laid out our strategy. "We won't show our hand right away," she explained. "In the preliminary hearing, they will present their case. Richard will talk about your instability, and Mark will play the role of the concerned brother. They'll expect you to be purely on the defensive to simply deny their claims. Let them build their narrative." "And then?" I asked. A sharp, confident smile spread across Jessica's face. "And then, when the judge is looking at their mountain of lies, we'll present our own evidence. We're not just going to prove you're competent, Donna. We're going to prove their entire case is a malicious, fraudulent attempt to extort money to cover up your brother's catastrophic financial failures. We won't just win. We will discredit them so thoroughly that no judge will ever take a petition from them seriously again." Walking out of her office that day, I felt a profound shift within me. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were now tempered by a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a strategic battle. They had brought the fight to my world, the world of facts, figures, and due diligence. They thought they were attacking Donna the daughter. They were about to be countersued by Donna the portfolio manager. In the weeks leading up to the court date, my life was a strange dichotomy. By day, I was immersed in the world of high finance, a world of logic, strategy, and immense responsibility. By night, I was preparing for a legal battle that felt like something out of a surreal drama, a fight against my own family that was based on pure fantasy. The contrast was stark and, in a way, empowering. My work became my sanctuary, a constant reminder of who I truly was, separate from the distorted image my father and brother were trying to project onto me. The core of Jessica's strategy was to hold our strongest card until the very last moment. While we had a mountain of evidence exposing Mark's financial ruin, Jessica wanted something more, an irrefutable, declarative statement of my own competence that would make my father's claims look not just wrong, but utterly absurd. "They've built their entire case around a caricature of you," she said during one of our final preparation meetings. "They're telling the court you're a flighty girl who doesn't understand money. They have no idea what you actually do they?" "No," I admitted. "To my father, my job is just some abstract thing on a computer. He hears stock market and thinks of a gambler throwing dice. He has no concept of the analysis, the risk management, the fiduciary duty involved." "And the scale of it," she pressed. "Does he know the kind of assets you manage?" I shook my head. I've tried to explain it over the years, but he just gets this glazed-over look. It doesn't fit his narrative of me, so he ignores it. He thinks I manage a few $1,000s for some small-time clients. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes bright with strategic fire. "And the actual number?" "The fund I'm the lead manager on," I said, taking a quiet breath, "currently has assets under management totaling just over $110 million. Jessica was silent for a moment, a slow grin spreading across her face. $100 million, she repeated slowly, savoring each word. "Oh, this is better than I thought. This is the knockout punch." Our plan was solidified. We would submit the required financial disclosures to the court as part of the proceedings, but we would bury the key details deep within a large file of documents. It was all public record, all legally submitted, but we wouldn't draw attention to it. We would let my father and Mark walk into that courtroom completely oblivious, armed with their flimsy stories about a college investment club. The preparation was meticulous. Jessica prepped me on what to expect, how to remain calm and composed, how to answer questions factually without letting emotion take over. Let them be the hysterical ones, she advised. You are the voice of reason. Your demeanor is as much a piece of evidence as any document we submit. We also decided to file a countersuit. This wasn't just about defense anymore, it was about holding them accountable. We sued for legal fees, defamation, and malicious prosecution. We claimed that the conservatorship petition was filed in bad faith, not out of concern for my well-being, but as a fraudulent attempt to gain access to my inheritance to cover my brother's significant personal and business debts. Our evidence file on Mark's financial state was attached as Exhibit A. Sending that countersuit was a point of no return. I knew that whatever fractured relationship I still had with my father and brother would be irrevocably severed. But they had left me no choice. They had chosen the battlefield, and I was done fighting with one hand tied behind my back. The night before the hearing, a wave of anxiety hit me. I sat in my apartment, the city lights twinkling below, and thought about my mother. I wondered if she had any idea that her final act of love and faith in me would lead to such an ugly war. Had she known how desperate Mark was? Had she foreseen that my father would be willing to tear our family apart to prop up his favored son? I pulled out the old, worn paperback on investing she had given me all those years ago. The cover was creased, the pages soft with age. Tucked inside the front cover was a small, handwritten note from her that I had forgotten was there. It read, "For my Donna, never let anyone tell you what you are worth. You calculate that for yourself." Tears welled in my eyes. It felt like a message from the past, a final piece of encouragement. She knew, she must have known on some level that I would have to fight battles to be seen for who I was. She couldn't protect me from it, but she had given me the tools, the education, the confidence, and now the financial independence to win. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about honoring her faith in me. It was about standing up for the truth of my own life against the lies they had constructed. My father and brother were about to learn a very public, very expensive lesson about underestimating me. They saw me as the irresponsible daughter, the little girl PL. Eyeing with monopoly money. They had no idea that for the last 8 years, I hadn't been playing a game. I had been running a $100 million empire, and I had the balance sheets to prove it. The secret was kept, the trap was set, and all we had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The courtroom would be my arena, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt completely and utterly prepared. The courtroom was smaller and more mundane than I had imagined. It wasn't a grand theater of justice, just a drab wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. But the tension inside it was immense. I sat beside Jessica at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across the aisle, my father and brother sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man who seemed overly confident. My father looked stern and self-righteous, the picture of a concerned patriarch. Mark just looked nervous, fidgeting with his tie and avoiding my gaze. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Judge Evans. She had a reputation for being sharp, impatient, and having no tolerance for theatrics. She entered the room, and a hush fell. The proceedings began. My father's lawyer, Mr. Davies, went first. He painted the picture we expected, a narrative of a loving father worried about his naive and impulsive daughter. He portrayed me as someone who had stumbled into a vaguely financial job but had no real-world sense. He spoke of my extravagant city lifestyle, which was comical given my modest apartment and frugal habits. Then, my father took the stand. Davies led him through a series of questions designed to establish his role as the responsible, worried parent. My father's voice was filled with a theatrical gravitas. He spoke of my mother's illness and how he felt she was not in her right mind when she wrote her will. "And what is your primary concern regarding your daughter, Donna, and this inheritance?" Davies asked, his tone dripping with sympathy. "My concern," my father said, looking at the judge with what he must have thought was profound sincerity, "is that she will squander it. She has always been irresponsible with money. She gets caught up in risky schemes." This inheritance, which my dear wife worked so hard for, would be gone in a year. It needs to be protected for her own good. He then recounted the infamous story of the University Investment Club, presenting the $200 loss as if it were a catastrophic financial collapse that proved my inherent incompetence. He was so convinced of his own narrative that he didn't seem to notice the judge's utterly unimpressed expression. Then it was Jessica's turn to cross-examine. She approached the stand, her demeanor calm and respectful. "Mr. Miller," she began, "you've stated that your daughter is financially irresponsible. Can you provide any other examples of this behavior from, say, the last decade?" My father faltered. "Well, she spends a lot of money living in the city. It's a very expensive lifestyle." "Do you know if she is in any debt?" Jessica asked. I assume so. That lifestyle must create debt." "So you don't actually know? You haven't seen her bank statements or credit card bills?" "No, but—" "So, to be clear," Jessica interrupted, her voice hardening slightly, "your entire case for her being financially irresponsible rests on a $200 loss from a college club 12 years ago and an assumption that her life is expensive. Is that correct?" My father puffed out his chest. "It shows a pattern. She's too irresponsible to handle this money," he shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He had lost his composure, falling back on sheer volume to make his point. Jessica let the outburst hang in the air for a moment before turning her attention to the judge. "Your Honor, the petitioner has made a very serious claim about my client's financial judgment. I believe it's time we introduced some clarity on the matter." She walked back to our table and picked up a single, bound document from our file. It was my professional dossier, including my employment verification, my official job title, my performance reviews, and the audited, certified statement of assets for the fund I managed. She handed a copy to my father's lawyer and one to the judge. "Mr. Miller," Jessica said, turning back to my father, "you seem to be under the impression that your daughter has a vaguely financial job. Could you please tell the court what her official title is at her firm?" I don't know the exact title," he stammered. "She's some kind of stock picker or something." "Her title," Jessica said, her voice ringing with authority, "is Senior Portfolio Manager. Do you know what that entails?" "It means she gambles with other people's money," my father sneered. Jessica ignored him and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, as you can see from the document provided, my client, Ms. Donna Miller, is the lead manager of the Sterling Capital Growth Fund. She is directly responsible for all investment decisions, risk assessment, and capital allocation for that fund." Judge Evans was looking down at the file, her eyebrows raising slightly as she turned a page. My father and brother were watching her, a sense of unease beginning to dawn on their faces. They had no idea what was coming. "And Mr. Miller," Jessica continued, her voice reaching a crescendo, "you are here today, under oath, claiming your daughter is too irresponsible to manage an inheritance of approximately $180,000. Is that correct?" "Yes, absolutely," my father insisted, seeing a chance to reassert himself. Jessica looked at the judge, who had just found the page she was looking for. Judge Evans looked down at the file, then up over her glasses at my father. Her voice was cold as ice. "Mr. Miller," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "your petition claims your daughter is incapable of managing an estate worth under $200,000. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "According to this certified financial statement, your daughter, Ms. Miller, currently manages a fund with assets totaling over $110 million. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. My father's face went completely white. He stared at the judge, his mouth slightly agape as if he couldn't process the words. He stumbled back a step, physically reeling from the shock. His lawyer looked like he had been struck by lightning. Across the aisle, I saw my brother Mark's jaw drop. He looked from the judge to his father, and then, finally, at me. In his eyes, I saw not just shock, but the dawning, horrified realization of just how badly they had miscalculated. And then, the quiet erupted. A ripple of murmured shock went through the few observers in the gallery. A court officer called for order. Judge Evans fixed my father with a withering glare. "Sir, you have brought a frivolous and frankly insulting petition before this court. You have wasted the court's time and resources to harass your daughter, a highly accomplished financial professional, based on nothing more than your own ignorance and family politics. You accuse her of incompetence, yet the evidence shows she is an expert. You have perjured yourself with your baseless claims, and you have done so, it appears, to benefit your son." She then turned her gaze to Mark. A son, I might add, who according to the countersuit filed by Ms. Miller, is facing multiple eviction notices, is in default on several loans, and is currently being sued by former employees for unpaid wages. Is this the responsible party you had in mind, Mr. Miller? My father couldn't speak. He just stood there, utterly broken and humiliated. The gavel came down with a deafening crack. "Petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice," Judge Evans declared. "The court will proceed with the countersuit for malicious prosecution. I am awarding all legal fees to Ms. Miller. This hearing is adjourned." As the judge swept out of the room, my father collapsed into his chair, a broken man. His pride, his authority, his entire self-conception as the wise patriarch had been shattered in a single sentence. I stood up with Jessica, a profound, quiet sense of vindication washing over me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed or cried. I had simply let the truth of my life speak for itself, and it had spoken louder than any of their lies. The aftermath of the court hearing was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, complete collapse. My father and brother didn't try to apologize or explain. They simply vanished from my life, retreating in shame and defeat. The legal battle concluded a few months later when they agreed to a settlement on my countersuit. They had no choice. Going to trial would have meant having all of Mark's disastrous financials laid bare in open court. The settlement required them to pay all of my legal fees, which were substantial, and included a non-disparagement clause preventing them from ever speaking ill of me or my professional reputation again. To cover the costs, my father had to take out a second mortgage on the family home, the very house he had lived in with my mother. There was a bitter irony in that his attempt to seize my mother's legacy had cost him a piece of his own. I never heard from Mark directly again. Through the family grapevine, I learned that Pet Connect had folded spectacularly just weeks after the hearing. Without the prospect of my mother's inheritance, his remaining investors pulled out, and the whole charade crumbled. The last I heard, he had moved to a different state to get a fresh start, which I knew was just code for running away from his debts and the mess he had created. He left a trail of unpaid employees and angry creditors in his wake. My father sent me one letter, about 6 months after the settlement. It was short, rambling, and filled with a sense of wounded pride. He never once apologized for what he did. Instead, he blamed me for airing our family's dirty laundry in public and for destroying your brother's chances. He still saw himself as the victim, the patriarch whose authority had been unjustly challenged. He couldn't comprehend that his own actions, his blindness, his favoritism, his greed, were the sole cause of our family's destruction. I read the letter, folded it neatly, and put it in a drawer. It was the final chapter of a book I no longer wanted to read. I never replied. For me, life moved on, but it was a different life. The battle had changed me. I had always sought my father's approval, always hoped that my next promotion or my next success would finally make him see me, really see me. The lawsuit, as painful as it was, had been a liberation. It forced me to stop seeking validation from someone who was incapable of giving it. I finally understood what my mother's note meant. Never let anyone tell you what you are worth. You calculate that for yourself. My worth wasn't tied to my father's opinion or my brother's jealousy. It was in my skills, my integrity, my accomplishments, and the life I had built for myself. With the inheritance my mother left me, I didn't go on a spending spree or make a risky investment. I honored her wishes. I used a portion of it to pay off the last of my student loans and put a significant down payment on my own apartment, finally giving myself a real home. The rest of it, I invested quietly and prudently, just as she knew I would. It wasn't a life-changing sum of money for me in the grand scheme of my finances, but its sentimental value was immeasurable. It was her final gift, a symbol of her faith in me, and I would always treasure it for that. My work also took on a new meaning. The ESG fund I had been developing before the lawsuit launched a year later and was a remarkable success. I found a deep sense of purpose in directing capital towards companies that were trying to make a positive impact, a stark contrast to my brother's self-serving and destructive ventures. I was building something real, something with lasting value, just not in the way my father understood. I learned that family is not always about blood. It's about the people who see you, support you, and believe in you. My circle of friends became my family. Jessica Morales, my lawyer, became a trusted mentor and friend. My colleagues, who had stood by me with unwavering support, became my tribe. I was not alone.